Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. So it seems the century-old debate about music in Islam has risen again. In this video, I will present some very interesting information about the subject. But please watch until the end so that you do not come away with any wrong conclusions. JazakumAllahu Khayran. Is music haram? In general, no. There are absolutely no Qur'anic verses or authentic hadith that explicitly use the term music, or in Arabic, musiqa, let alone declare it haram. The term musiqa itself originates from Greek, and it is defined in modern dictionaries as the arrangement of sounds to create combinations of form, harmony, melody, rhythm, or expressive content. In essence, music includes vocal, instrumental, or mechanical sounds that have rhythm, melody, or harmony. To claim that all music is haram would imply that the adhan, the call to prayer, bird singing, a mother humming a soothing tune to her baby, or even your cell phone ring would be considered haram because they fit this classical definition of music, or musiqa. This is why we must stop generalizing with statements like music is haram, especially since the term musiqa likely did not even appear in Islamic literature until centuries after the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Making such a claim is like saying meat is haram. Meat in general is not haram. Only specific types of meat are prohibited. Allah says in the Quran,
قل من حرم زينة الله التي أخرج لعباده والطيبات من الرزق.
Who has forbidden the beautiful things of Allah which He has brought forth for His servants, and the good things of sustenance. Surah Al-A'raf 7:32. Now, is all modern music permissible? Just as there are types of meat that are haram, there is music that is unquestionably impermissible. Music that promotes or glorifies immorality, such as sexual behavior, drugs, greed, immodesty, and general immorality, is clearly haram. This is rampant in much of today's music industry. If anyone watching this video is hoping to find a fatwa that allows you to listen to all that kind of bad music that is out today, I'm sorry, that is not going to happen.
ولا تقربوا الفواحش ما ظهر منها وما بطن.
Do not come near indecent things, openly or secretly. Surah Al-An'am 6:151. Having said that, the issue at hand is about musical instruments in Islam. Are guitars okay? Flutes, pianos, drums? As a student of knowledge, I am not qualified to make a fatwa one way or the other. The only thing I can do is present information from other scholars and information that is often overlooked in regards to this topic. For an official ruling, please contact your local imam or person of knowledge. The burden of proof. Islam has a clear rule. Everything is permissible unless proven haram. The burden of proof lies on those who claim something is haram. Is the term music, musiqa, mentioned in the Quran? As I said before, no. In the Quran, again, no. Not even directly, no. And not even terms like singing or musical instruments have been mentioned in the Quran. However, there are scholars, including Abdullah ibn Abbas radiyallahu anhu, who said that this verse refers to al-ghina, which means singing.
ومن الناس من يشتري لهو الحديث ليضل عن سبيل الله بغير علم ويتخذها هزوا.
And of mankind is he who purchases idle talk to mislead others from the path of Allah without knowledge. Surah Luqman, verse 6. Even if this ayah is referring to singing, the verse specifically condemns those using it to mislead other people from the path of Allah. The same principle would apply to poetry, books, or anything else used to misguide people. So now let's talk about musical instruments. Musical instruments. There are authentic hadith referencing musical instruments in both negative and positive ways. The most well-known hadith is one in Bukhari.
ليكونن من أمتي أقوام يستحلون الحر والحرير والخمر والمعازف,
stating that some people in the ummah will make alcohol, zina, silk, and musical instruments as permissible. But the fact that silk was included is very interesting because silk is not categorically haram for everyone. Women are allowed to wear silk, and the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam even allowed some of his companions to wear silk for certain circumstances. This suggests that musical instruments can also have a similar contextual permissibility and demonstrates the importance of context in Islamic rulings. Another interesting hadith mentions that there's a narration where the companions considered using bells or horns for the adhan. While they ultimately chose the human voice, this shows that musical instruments were not viewed inherently as evil or prohibited. There is so many ahadith about drums, and the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam actually listening to drums. One particular hadith, a woman came to the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam and asked to fulfill a vow by playing a drum in his presence. This was not for Eid or a wedding, but a personal vow, illustrating the flexibility of Islamic rulings on this topic. Drums for weddings and Eid. Aisha reported the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam said, "Announce this marriage, conduct it in the mosque, and strike the drums for it." So the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam is specifically telling Aisha radiyallahu anha to play drums during a wedding. The Prophet Dawood alayhi salam is known for his melodious voice and the use of instruments in worship. In the Torah, Allah commanded Dawood to make specific instruments for worship. This is confirmed by the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wasallam, who said to Abu Musa, "You have been given a mizmar," a melodious voice from the mizmar or the instruments of Dawood. The mizmar can be translated as a musical wind instrument. Classical historical perspectives on music. It is important to acknowledge that the four major schools of thought historically considered musical instruments as impermissible. Their views were shaped by the context of their times. For example, Imam Abu Hanifa, may Allah be pleased with him, lived 80 years after the Hijrah. He lived during the rise of the Abbasid dynasty, where music was often associated with immorality and non-Islamic religious traditions. His primary concern was to safeguard the integrity of Islamic practices. And all of the four Imams, Imam Malik, Imam Shafi'i, and Imam Ibn Hanbal, lived around the same time. After the Islamic society developed, there were other scholars like Ibn Hazm, who was born 348 years after the Hijrah, Imam al-Ghazali, Imam al-Shawkani, and Imam Tahir al-Asfahani, and others who permitted musical instruments as long as they do not lead to sinful behavior. Ibn Hazm argued that listening to musical instruments is permissible as long as it does not involve sinful content or distract from obligatory acts. Imam al-Ghazali, in Ihya al-Ulumuddin, he wrote, "Musical instruments and singing are not inherently haram unless they lead to prohibited behavior such as intoxication, immorality, or neglect of obligations." Imam Shawkani also stated that musical instruments are permissible if it does not promote sinful acts. Other scholars, Imam Tahir al-Asfahani, he said that musical instruments are permissible if they serve a beneficial purpose and do not promote sinful behavior. To say that the permissibility of musical instruments is a strange opinion from one scholar is just not true. There are many other scholars that had more lenient positions on the use of musical instruments. Photography and modern comparisons. Our current understanding for photography in Islam offers a fascinating parallel. The hadith against picture makers, or al-musawwirun, is harsher than any of those about music and musical instruments. The most severely punished on the Day of Judgment will be the image makers. This is in Sahih al-Bukhari. However, modern scholars have reevaluated the context of these ahadith, differentiating between idol making and modern photography. Today, even scholars who once prohibited photography have adapted, recognizing its utility in the modern world. This reevaluation is significant when considering the permissibility of musical instruments. The Qur'an must be preserved in the hearts. One of the most important responsibilities of Muslims is to preserve the Qur'an in their hearts and lives. Although some scholars have permitted musical instruments, it is usually with great caution, and if it takes away from the remembrance of the Qur'an, it should be avoided. This preservation requires focus, dedication, and prioritization. Music, like poetry, has the potential to distract from this noble goal. Allah mentions in the Qur'an the impact of excessive poetry when it diverts from the remembrance of Allah. As for the poets, only the misguided follow them. Do you not see that they wander aimlessly in every valley and say what they do not do? Surah Ash-Shu'ara 26, 224 to 226. While poetry itself is not haram, its potential to divert the attention from Allah's words is highlighted in this ayah.
In the same fashion, music and musical instruments, when it consumes one's time
or distracts from the Qur'an, can have the same effect. It is vital that Muslims prioritize the Qur'an and ensure that their hearts remain attached to it above all else. Limiting music to Islamic songs or nasheed that remind us of Allah can help maintain this balance. Music production today is vastly different from the past. Technology allows even the human voice to mimic instruments. For stricter scholars who permit only vocal-based music, this opens fascinating avenues for creativity. However, whether a violin sound comes from a human voice or a synthesizer, this might be splitting hairs. But for Muslim musicians, this boundary has sparked a unique form of creativity, and it is inspiring to see how vocal-only tracks can produce astonishingly complex and beautiful compositions of music. In conclusion, the evidence to declare musical instruments universally haram is not definitive according to many scholars.
While we respect the classical scholars that viewed musical instruments as impermissible,
we must also acknowledge those who permitted it with conditions. Most importantly, any music, whether with instruments or not, that draws people away from Allah
and His remembrance is haram.
Let's engage with this topic thoughtfully, avoiding extremes and always prioritizing our connection with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. JazakumAllahu Khayran. Wassalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.